Hey, this is Mr. Hansen. I wanted to talk a little bit about standard deviation with you today. Standard deviation is just the average distance of all data values in a data set from the mean, the average distance from the mean. And usually what happens is you'll get a distribution kind of like this. If you have a mean right here, the data values kind of cluster around the mean on the left and right side, and then they taper off a little bit. And this is what we call a normal standard distribution when this happens, and you have kind of a curve like that, like a bell-shaped curve. And so when I've talked about standard deviation in the past with my students, it's a measure of variability. And usually I've been teaching them in terms of with examples of how consistent you can be. For example, a basketball player scores between 18 and 20 points each night, 18, 19, 20, 21 points. What's happening there is they're very consistent, and so their standard deviation is going to kind of look like this. They're going to have a lot of data clumped right next to each other. It's going to be sort of tall, and their distribution will look like that. And their first standard deviation will be very close to the mean, kind of like this. And that tells us that we have a spread that is it's very narrow. It's clumped together, and that means that things are pretty consistent. There's not a lot of variability, and so I found that it was easy to come up with examples for consistent or low number standard deviation. Here's another one: daily calorie intake for a healthy person. Again, you're going to have a lot of data points clustering around the mean, and it's going to kind of go like that. Maybe an unhealthy person who diets off and on, that's probably not such a good thing. But in terms of a healthy person, you'd have probably a consistent standard deviation. And then finally, if you took the students that go to a school over the years, if you have a whole lot of students one year and then very few students the next year, that's hard to know how to know how to fill teacher positions, because students it's hard to predict. So when we say consistent, we mean it's easier to predict, and so we want to have students that maybe the same number of students year in and year out, or close to the same number, and that would be another example of a kind of a consistent standard deviation, or your data is pretty close to the mean. But there are other possibilities when it's optimal to have a variable standard deviation, a very large standard deviation, which I've always had a hard time coming up with examples for this, but I have a few here in this particular video. So the first one is right now President Biden has a 54% approval rating, and it's held steady since he's been in office the last 100 days. And President Trump had a very steady approval rating too. It was lower, but it's still a very steady approval rating. And at first maybe you think, well, that's a good thing, but what's going on is people have kind of made up their minds already about who they like, and they aren't paying much attention to policy. So there's not a lot of people changing their mind, and that's why the presidential approval rating is so steady, which is kind of setting us up for a problem in our country if we can't think in terms of how the other side thinks, or at times compromise in how we think. So that's one where a larger standard deviation might be a little bit better. Another one is the age of people in your neighborhood. Some neighborhoods are very homogeneous, and they have all the same age people, and so you miss out on kids and elderly people and families, and when there's a wider variety of ages, people tend to maybe have more opportunities to take care of each other, and to have more of a neighborhood feel. So there's another one where standard deviation, a large one, might be a good thing. Okay, age of people working at a company. If all of your people are the same age, they will probably retire at the same time, and then you have to hire a whole bunch of people, and you don't have any experience left. So the idea is to kind of get young people that have been in there a while, and older people, and so it's good to have a variable age distribution at any company that you're working for. They usually always like that. So these are examples where you'd want a larger standard deviation, and the consistent ones are examples where it'd be more of a positive thing to have a more consistent or smaller standard deviation. I hope that this helps you think of standard deviation and maybe a broader perspective. I appreciate you listening in. Thank you. This is Mr. Hansen signing out.